Hi everyone, this is Nia and today I'm going to be painting 3 black cats. I've chosen 3 positions here that I'm going to paint using the wet on wet technique so they turn as fluffy black silhouettes. This is the first reference image that I use. I'm just going to do a sleeping cat, but for mine I'm going to make the tail less fluffy and I'm going to make it longer to create more movement in the composition. As you all know, I'm not very good at drawing animals. I always feel uncomfortable doing them, but I try to just look at the reference and see where I can break down the shapes. I can see 2 separate main shapes, which is the body and the head, and once I've established those positions, I can then add the tail and also the legs. I know my lines are very scratchy here, but that's why I tried as best as I can to draw it as light as possible, so the lines are still easy to erase. Moving on to the second cat, this is the reference image that I'm going to be using, but I'm going to make this the same type of cat. It's going to be a bit more lanky and the tail is going to be longer, so it's closely aligned to the previous cat that I drew out earlier. Finally, for the last one, I'm just going to draw a very simple one with the cat having its back towards us. Once I'm happy with the positions, I just want to make sure the lines are a little bit cleaner and less scratchy, so the pencil marks won't show as I paint later on. Okay, so next let's move on to the colors. I'm only going to use 3 and also bleed proof white. The cats are just going to be black, but I'm going to use those other 2 colors as decorations in the background. Now for the black, I'm going to use Lamp Black by Daniel Smith, Permanent Yellow Deep by Holbein, Winsor Red by Winsor Newton, and Bleed Proof White by Dr. P.H. Martins. I'm also going to add additional details using my Snowman Drawing Pen. This is in the size 0.05. Now let's begin to paint, and though this is a very simple composition, the technique can be a little bit tricky. You have to understand your paper and how damp the paper needs to be. So here I'm starting with a large brush that I just dampened with a bit of water, and I'm going to wet the area of the paper where the first cat is, and as you can see, I went over the lines. Hopefully you can see the wet areas here. The water is not puddling, it's just evenly distributed. Here I feel like I didn't wet the tail enough, so I switched to a smaller brush so I can get a bit closer to the line for the tail without hitting other cats. Since this is my first one, I wasn't very confident, so I want to start painting right at the center just to see how much the paint will bloom out. As you can see, even though I only painted a small area because of the damp surface, the paint will just bloom out fairly quickly. This is real time, by the way. How much the paint bloom out will greatly depend on the load on your brush as well as how damp your paper is. This is why you might want to be careful the first time just to see how your paper reacts. Because I was going a little bit too slow, you can see that the area of the tail is now a little bit too dry. Paint isn't blooming and creating that fuzzy texture. So I'm going to try to help it by using the stotting motion, because when you do the stotting motion, the paint or the water will be a bit more concentrated on those dots and it will spread out a little bit more. And to soften the edges, I'm going to clean my brush and use my damp brush to help soften some of the edges. And now that the head and the legs are a little bit more dry, I'm going to go back in with a thicker consistency of the lamp black and just paint section by section. The reason why I'm not working on a damp surface for these areas are because they're very small and I don't want the paint to accidentally bloom out, creating a large puddle or a mess. So for the ears as well as the legs, especially around the tips, I will prefer to paint on a dry surface, whereas on the larger areas like the body, I'm going to paint it on a damper surface. I'm also going to leave out a little bit of space so the base color is showing through, or I'm just letting the paint bloom around the edges per section. This way, the different sections have softer or lighter edges, and this will give more of a form to the cats instead of the cats looking completely two-dimensional. Now I'm going to go back to the tail. I'm going to dampen the edges just using clean water. I try to not disturb the black too much. And then I'm going to paint straight on this damp surface using lamp black again in a thick consistency. And this time you can see the edges are nice and fuzzy. If it's a little bit messy, I'm just going to direct the paint with my brush to help it neaten out. I can see that the body is a little bit more dry now and the color is also fading, so I'm going to increase the saturation. I'm also going to paint over the ear and the head just to create a clear separation from the ear at the back. I feel like I'm pretty happy with this one, so I'm just going to completely dry it off to set all of the paint so it doesn't bloom anymore. And I'm going to move on to the next cat. Okay, I'm going to repeat the same method, starting with my large brush just so I can cover the area easily. And I'm just going to dampen it the same way, nice and evenly without puddles. I want the paper to absorb a little bit of that water, which is why I'm trying to work it in as well. I feel like this pose is a little bit easier to paint, and I am also a bit more confident now with how the paint will react. So I'm starting with a thick consistency straight away, but as you can see, just like before, I tried to paint section by section. As you can see, as I'm painting the tail, when I take off my brush, the paint bloom out at the tip. This is why I like to do the dotting motion for the tail to make it all fluffy. Now with a drier load on my brush, I'm just going to help the paint move around so the edges doesn't look too fluffy and uncontrollable. I like to do the head last because I feel like this requires a bit more control. Here I'm painting on the damp surface, but I'm being very careful around the edges so the face doesn't look like a blob. I prefer to use a slightly lighter consistency, and I can slowly build up the value as the surface dries a bit more. This way the edges won't bloom out too quickly. You can see that I've left out the ears. I'm just going to dry it off completely so I can paint the ears on a dry surface. The tail here looks a bit too thin where it's connecting to the body, so I'm just going to add a little bit more black. This way it'll make more sense so the tail doesn't look like it's going to detach from the body. Once I'm happy with this one, I want to make sure everything's completely dry before moving on to the third and final cat, so the paint won't bleed into one another. So again, I just want to show you what the surface should look like. It's not puddling, it still looks quite flat, and it's evenly dampened. Again, I'm going to go straight in with a very thick consistency since I feel fairly comfortable doing this now. And you can see that I'm leaving quite a lot of space around the edges for the paint to bloom out. I'm just going to move on to the other features like the tail and the legs, and if the paint doesn't bloom right to the edge of the outline, I'm just going to help it move with a little bit more paint. I'm going to be very careful as I'm painting the hind legs. I want to make sure I have enough space in between them so they will look separated. I was being a bit too careless and I created a point at the tummy, and when this happened, I'm just going to help it move with my brush and also take off the excess with a clean dry brush. As I'm painting the head, I realize that the tip of the tail is blooming quite a lot and I don't want it to move any further, so I'm just going to lock it in by drying it off completely. Now going back to the head, I feel like the edges look a little bit too sharp, so I'm just going to dampen the edges slightly. Not too much because I don't want the paint that I'm applying next to bloom too much. Lastly, with the black, I'm just going to add it to the bottom of the leg at the back here, just to separate it from the one in front. And once I'm done, I want to make sure everything's completely bone dry. After this, I'm going to paint the eyes using a thick consistency of bleed-proof white in a dry brush load, so I can really control the shape. I want to make the eyes kind of pointy to give it a little bit more of an attitude. I'm using the same brush here, but you can also use a size 0 brush to make it a bit easier, or even a white pen. Next, I'm going to paint the background, and I've chosen the color orange just to create an autumn feel, but you can also use other colors as well. For the orange, I'm using a mix of Permanent Yellow Deep and Winsor Red, and I'm also going to use a touch of the lamp black to mute the color slightly. I'm going to use a medium consistency to paint around the cats, and I'm going to create somewhat of a squarish shape. But what I'm trying to do here is, after looking at the frame, I really want to extend the composition upwards, which is why I decided to extend it with the square here without painting the whole thing. The shape doesn't always have to be a square, but try to find something that fits your composition nicely. I quite like where this is going, but I feel like some of the colors are a little bit too light, so I'm just going to add another layer to some of the squares or the blobs. After this, I'm just going to completely dry it off so I can add some maple leaves on top of these blobs or squares to add to the autumn feel. I'm just going to use the same mix from Winsor Red and Permanent Yellow Deep, but I'm going to use a thick consistency this time. To paint the maple leaves, I like to think of 3 main leaves, and I just add 2 smaller ones at the bottom. So here's an upright one, so it's a bit easier to see, the 3 main leaves and 2 smaller ones. I feel like this is enough for the composition, so next I'm going to paint on the stems. I'm using the same mix with a little bit of lamp black mixed into it, and I've also switched to my size 0 brush to make it a bit easier to paint the really fine lines. I also want to add some black doodles just to link this to the cats again, and I'm just going to paint some lines as well as some random dots. You can also add other doodles with different mediums if you can think of anything else. Lastly, I'm going to add the whiskers using my 0.05 pen, so it's very thin, and I'm also going to add some loose fur. I'm not going to overdo it on the fur, I just want the really fine details, so if you look a bit closer you can see them, but you can't really see them at a distance. And I don't know why, but I decided to also add some really small dots in random places. I just personally feel like it links to the fine fur, but of course this is optional. But that's basically it for this painting. I had so much fun painting this one. Once you understand the flow between the paint and paper, it's actually very satisfying. Like usual, the list of tools as well as my social media links will be in the description box. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Bye!